Moving on further to unemployment, we compared those capital cities, but in fact there are certain regions of capital cities. Now, this is obviously Brisbane, but you can see here we've got the Caboolture region up here, and we've got the Logan region down here where we've got high unemployment rates. Now, unemployment means lower dollars, and both of those factors relate to lower health. So you would expect that these regions would actually have a higher mortality and morbidity rates than the rest of the population. Looking on a broader scale, looking across the nation in terms of unemployment, these are the areas outside the capital city, just outside the capital, so the peri-urban areas around capital cities. If we look closely at Melbourne, just up north there, Brisbane to the north and south, as I said, but also right across this band here, these rural areas, a lot of unemployment, so you would expect health issues. And there's these series of slides that I want to show you in terms of disadvantage. And I've chosen one from each state. So we've got the Queensland example first, the most advantaged areas in the city. Now, if you come from these cities, there will be no surprise here. These are mostly the outer leafy suburbs of Brisbane, except for the inner city. That's where the most advantaged and least disadvantaged suburbs are. If we then go on to look at the most disadvantaged areas in the Brisbane area, where you would expect to find the most problems in terms of income, in terms of employment, in terms of education, in terms of social status, so SES in general. You find that some of you who come from Brisbane will be very familiar with some of these areas. You can imagine that, in fact, because of that, the health of these areas is going to be compromised because there's a lot of disadvantage. Now, if we move on then to examples from other cities, we look at Melbourne, for example. For those of you who come from Melbourne, there's no surprises here. South Bank Docklands is the least disadvantaged, the most advantaged, going right through this list. And then if we look at the most disadvantaged communities, where you would imagine the most health problems are, you can see again these outer sort of suburbs, peri-urban areas of Melbourne, where you would expect to find a lot of health issues. Moving on to Sydney, again, so these very affluent areas where there's most advantage, so Mosman, Bullarin, West Sydney, Lane Cove, etc., Hunters Hill, of course, no surprises there, but the least advantaged areas around Sydney comprise some of these western peri-urban areas, Campbelltown, South Campbelltown, north, up to the north around Gosford, Wyong, all these areas, Blacktown, so you would expect large health issues in these areas, and that's exactly what we find. So we looked at the levels of employment or unemployment across the state and across the nation. Corresponding to that, of course, is low income. And you can see here it's the same old story here. You can see that in the capital cities, right across the board, the rate of low income is very much lower than either in those peri-urban areas or the rest of the state or territory, or the average, in fact. And this is one of the reasons why in many countries, whether they're industrialized or developing, people tend to drift towards the urban areas because they know that there are jobs there, whereas there's not a lot of jobs and incomes fairly low in these outer areas. So there's a real move right across the world for people to move into the central capital city areas, no matter which country you're looking at. And that has substantial implications for health and a range of other options. Now, if we do a comparison right across the Australian capital cities, you can see that the number of low-income families actually generally remains fairly consistent. You can see here that Adelaide is actually quite high. Darwin actually is surprisingly low, and Canberra, of course, is quite low. So these statistics are quite interesting in terms of identifying potential problem areas. So you can imagine, and also trends. So you can see here that if we look at comparisons between 1986 and 1996, there seems to have been a movement generally in each city and also across the cities of an increase of low-income families in those areas. So these are the sorts of figures that public health professionals and health promotion professionals need to watch, because these factors, these increases in low-income families generally over a period of time will lead to health issues. And it basically provides health authorities with an ability to plan. Again, we looked at this area before, exactly the same areas that had high unemployment, so that north around Caboolture and south around Logan, where you would expect to find a lot of health issues. Again, just reminding you of this particular conceptual framework of how well-being can be affected by inequality. So we've looked at income inequality from the point of view of, for example, jobs. Okay, so there's jobs here, so it's employment as well. And that has implications in terms of social well-being, psychological well-being, but also in terms of dollars, which buys you a range of factors, including education, food, housing, and a safe workplace. And again, you find that a lot of these areas, these poor areas that I mentioned, there's intergenerational, what we call intergenerational disadvantage and poverty. So we find that in these areas, this disadvantage has been going on for quite a long time, and it extends and intensifies in the children of people who've suffered through it in the first place.